The Guardian, a story of second chances. The grizzly's massive head was 18 inches from Sarah Chen's face when she stopped screaming. Blood ran warm down her left arm, soaking through the torn sleeve of her jacket. Her right leg was twisted at an angle that meant broken bones, pinned beneath her own body weight where she had fallen. The attacking bear, a young male, maybe 400 pounds, stood over her, breath hot and rank, deciding whether she was still a threat or ready prey. That's when the second bear appeared. 600 pounds of muscle and fur moving with impossible speed through the Alaskan spruce forest. The new bear didn't charge at Sarah. He charged at her attacker, his roar so deep and primal it vibrated in Sarah's chest cavity like a second heartbeat. The young male spun, confused, and found himself facing something far more dangerous than an injured human. An adult male grizzly in full protective fury. The fight lasted 8 seconds. The young bear retreated with a gashed shoulder and the kind of fear that comes from knowing you almost died. The Guardian stood his ground until the threat disappeared into the trees, then turned those dark, intelligent eyes on Sarah. She watched him approach, unable to move, unable to breathe, waiting to discover if she had just traded one death for another. But the bear didn't attack. He stood between Sarah and the direction the young male had fled, a 600-pound barrier between her and danger. Then he did something that made Sarah's mind fracture and reform around a truth she couldn't process. He sat down. Just sat. Like a dog keeping watch over its fallen companion. And he didn't leave. Before we understand why a wild grizzly would risk his life for a human stranger, before we can comprehend how he knew exactly where Sarah was when she needed him most, we need to go back 12 years to a moment that should have ended in death but instead became the beginning of something science can't fully explain. If stories about bonds that transcend species, distance, and time touch your heart, stories that prove love doesn't need words or reasons, only witness, then subscribe to Feral Soul Stories. Join our community of people who believe that the wildest hearts sometimes understand us better than our own kind. New stories every week. Real emotions. Untamed hearts. Sarah Chen had been a trauma nurse in Fairbanks for 7 years when she took that first hiking trip into the backcountry near Denali in August 2011. She was 32 years old, recently divorced, living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like coffee and loneliness. The divorce had been her idea. Her ex-husband wasn't cruel, just absent in all the ways that mattered. But that didn't make the empty apartment any easier to come home to after 12-hour shifts in the ER where she held together broken bodies and pretended her own life wasn't falling apart. The hike was supposed to be therapeutic. 4 days solo in the wilderness with nothing but a tent, freeze-dried meals, and the kind of silence that either heals you or breaks you completely. Sarah had read somewhere that being alone in nature helps you find yourself. What she actually found on the second day, at mile marker 37 on the Savage River Trail, was an illegal leg-hold trap with a dying grizzly cub caught in its steel jaws. She almost walked past. The trap was partially hidden under low-growing willow shrubs, and the cub, maybe 12 weeks old, 25 pounds of golden brown fur and desperation, had gone quiet in that way dying things do when they've exhausted themselves fighting. If Sarah hadn't stopped to adjust her backpack, if the wind hadn't shifted just right, carrying the scent of blood and fear, she would have missed him completely. But she did stop. She did smell it. And when she pushed aside the willow branches and saw those dark eyes looking up at her with a mix of terror and the faintest glimmer of hope, Sarah made a choice that would change both their lives. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip her multi-tool. The trap was old, illegal even in Alaska where trapping was still permitted in certain areas, designed for large predators and built to hold them until they died or the trapper returned. The cub's left front paw was caught just above the wrist, the metal teeth having crushed through skin and into bone. He had clearly been fighting for hours, maybe all night. The ground around the trap was torn up, vegetation shredded, signs of desperate struggle everywhere. Sarah knew the moment she touched that trap that she was probably making the worst decision of her life. Mother grizzlies don't leave cubs this young. If Mama was nearby and saw a human near her baby, Sarah would be dead before she could explain she was trying to help. But the cub's breathing was shallow, irregular, his tiny chest rising and falling with less conviction each time. He had maybe an hour left, 2 at most. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, approaching slowly, hands raised. "I'm going to help you, but this is going to hurt." The cub tried to pull away when she knelt beside him, but he was too weak. His whole body trembled, shock, pain, hypothermia starting to set in even though it was August. Sarah had treated enough trauma in the ER to recognize the signs. Blood loss, tissue damage, infection probably already starting in the wound. This little bear needed a veterinarian with proper equipment, not a nurse with a multi-tool and a first aid kit designed for humans. But she was what he had. The trap release mechanism was rusted but functional. Sarah worked for 11 minutes. She would remember later, exactly 11 minutes because she counted her own breaths to stay calm, while the cub whimpered and tried to bite her twice, catching only her jacket sleeve. When the jaws finally sprang open, the cub didn't run. He couldn't. His damaged paw wouldn't support any weight. Sarah did something then that every wilderness safety manual warns against. She picked him up. 25 pounds of wild predator, injured and terrified, and she wrapped him in her fleece jacket and held him against her chest where he could hear her heartbeat. The cub fought for maybe 30 seconds, then went still. Not dead still. Sarah could feel his labored breathing, but the kind of still that comes when a creature decides to stop fighting and take the gamble that this strange animal holding him might not be another threat. The nearest road was 14 miles back the way she had come. Sarah had a satellite phone for emergencies. This qualified. But as she sat there in the Alaskan wilderness with a dying bear cub in her arms, she realized she had no idea who to call. Fish and wildlife would probably euthanize him. A cub this young, this injured, with no mother, had virtually no chance of survival even with intervention. The rehabilitation centers she vaguely knew existed were all hundreds of miles away, understaffed, probably at capacity. Her hands found her phone anyway. Later, she wouldn't remember making the decision. She just remembered dialing the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center in Portage, 280 miles south, and getting a woman named Dr. Rebecca Moss on the line. "He's dying," Sarah said without preamble. Grizzly cub, maybe 3 months old, crushed paw from a leg trap. "I'm at mile marker 37 on Savage River Trail. I need to know if there's any point in me carrying him out or if I should just..." Her voice cracked. She couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Moss was quiet for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then, "How bad is the paw?" Sarah looked down. The cub had his eyes closed now, his tiny face pressed against her sternum. Bones visible. Severe tissue trauma. He's lost a lot of blood. "How far to your vehicle?" 14 miles. Another pause. "That's a 7-hour hike with that kind of weight, rough terrain. He might not survive the trip." "I know," Sarah said, and then quieter. "But if I leave him here, he definitely won't." She heard Dr. Moss take a breath. "Start walking. I'll have a team ready when you get to the trailhead." "But Ms., what's your name?" "Chen. Sarah Chen." "Ms. Chen, you need to understand that even if you get him here, his chances are less than 20%. Cubs this young don't survive this kind of trauma. Nature doesn't give them second chances." Sarah looked down at the small bear in her arms, at the way his injured paw, swollen, mangled, probably beyond saving, curled slightly against her jacket as if seeking comfort. "Then I guess we'll be the exception," she said, and started walking. The hike took 9 hours. Not 7, 9. Sarah had underestimated both the cub's weight and how carrying 25 pounds of trembling animal would affect her balance on the uneven trail. She fell twice, both times managing to twist so she landed on her shoulder instead of crushing the cub beneath her. The second fall tore something in her rotator cuff. She felt the hot stab of injury and knew she'd be in a sling for weeks, but she didn't stop. Every hour, she checked his breathing. Every hour, it got a little weaker. At hour 4, she started talking to him. Didn't know why, didn't know if it helped, but the silence felt too much like giving up. She told him about Fairbanks, about the ER where she worked, about her ex-husband who collected vintage motorcycles and never once asked her about her day. She told him about her sister in Seattle who was pregnant with twins and terrified. She told him things she'd never said out loud to another person, and the bear, unconscious or maybe just too weak to care, listened with the kind of perfect attention that has nothing to do with understanding words and everything to do with being present for another soul's pain. At hour 7, Sarah's satellite phone rang. Dr. Moss, checking her location. 2 more miles, Sarah gasped. Her legs were shaking. Her shoulders screamed with every step. We're going to make it. Sarah, Dr. Moss said gently. His breathing is fine, Sarah lied. It wasn't fine. It was barely there. We're going to make it, she repeated, and she didn't know if she was trying to convince Dr. Moss or herself or the small dying creature whose heartbeat she could still feel, faint and irregular, against her chest. The parking lot appeared through the trees at 6:47 p.m., exactly 9 hours and 23 minutes after Sarah had started walking. An Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center van was waiting, back doors open. Dr. Rebecca Moss, a woman in her mid-40s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many animals die, standing ready with a portable oxygen setup. Give him to me, Dr. Moss said, and Sarah couldn't. Her arms had locked around the cub, muscle memory from 9 hours of carrying, and for a terrible moment she physically could not make herself let go. Sarah, Dr. Moss said, softer. Let me help him. Sarah's arms unlocked. Dr. Moss took the cub with practiced efficiency, already assessing, already moving toward the van. Get in, she called over her shoulder. You're coming with us. Can't my car? Can stay here. You just hiked 14 miles with a shoulder injury. You're in shock, probably dehydrated, and if you try to drive right now you'll end up in an accident. Get in. Sarah got in. The drive to Portage took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Sarah sat in the back of the van while Dr. Moss and her assistant, a young man named Tom with steady hands and a gentle voice, worked on the cub with mobile veterinary equipment. They ran in 4 lines so small Sarah could barely see it. They administered antibiotics, pain medication, fluids. They wrapped the damaged paw in a temporary stabilizing bandage, though Sarah could see from Dr. Moss's expression that the paw itself was probably beyond saving. Will he live? Sarah asked at some point, her voice cracking from dehydration and emotion. Dr. Moss didn't look up from adjusting the foredrip. Ask me again in 48 hours. The Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center looked nothing like Sarah had imagined. She'd pictured something clinical, sterile, institutional. What she found was a sprawling property of natural enclosures, running water, and facilities that looked like someone had actually thought about what wild animals needed rather than what was convenient for humans. Dr. Moss led her through the main building to a medical wing where the real veterinary work happened. The cub, still unconscious, still barely breathing, was transferred to a temperature-controlled incubator designed for orphaned wildlife. Dr. Moss worked with 3 other staff members for the next 2 hours, taking x-rays, cleaning the wound, running blood work. Sarah watched from a chair someone had brought her, unable to leave, unable to look away. At 11:30 p.m., Dr. Moss finally stopped moving long enough to collapse into the chair beside Sarah's. She looked exhausted. The paw has to come off, she said without preamble. Too much damage, infections already spreading. We can amputate tomorrow if he stabilizes enough for surgery. Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. Will he be able to survive in the wild? With 3 legs? No, Dr. Moss said simply. He'll live in captivity for the rest of his life. Here if he makes it. Or at another facility. But he'll never be released. Sarah looked at the small bear in his incubator, at the rise and fall of his tiny chest, at the mangled paw that would be gone by tomorrow. She had saved his life. She had also sentenced him to a lifetime in captivity, forever separated from the wild he was born to inhabit. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she didn't know if she was apologizing to the cub or to Dr. Moss or to the universe for interfering with nature's brutal mathematics. Dr. Moss put a hand on her shoulder, the uninjured one. You did the right thing. Sometimes the right thing doesn't feel good, but that doesn't make it less right. Sarah slept that night in a small volunteer apartment on the property. Dr. Moss had insisted, had literally walked Sarah to the room and pointed at the bed with the kind of authority that didn't allow for argument. Sarah lay down fully clothed, certain she wouldn't sleep, and woke up 8 hours later with her phone ringing. Dr. Moss. He's awake, was all she said. Sarah ran. The cub was indeed awake, though awake was generous. His dark eyes were half open, clouded with pain and medication, but tracking movement. When Sarah approached his incubator, those eyes found her face and held it. Recognition? Impossible. He'd been unconscious the entire hike. But Sarah could have sworn she saw something in that look that went beyond animal instinct. "Hey, little one," Sarah whispered, pressing her hand against the transparent wall of the incubator. The cub made a sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a chirp, something uniquely grisly and utterly heartbreaking. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." Dr. Moss stood beside her, checking monitors. "We're doing the amputation this afternoon. He's stable enough. Do you want to be here?" Sarah should have said no. Should have said goodbye, should have driven back to Fairbanks and her empty apartment and her shifts at the ER where she saved human lives and didn't get emotionally attached. Should have let this be a story she told at parties someday, the time she rescued a bear cub and then moved on with her life. "Yes," she said instead. "I want to be here." The surgery took 4 hours. Sarah sat in the observation room and watched Dr. Moss and her team work with the kind of precision that comes from caring deeply about patients who can't speak their gratitude. The damaged paw came off cleanly, too damaged to save, better gone than slowly killing him through infection. They sutured him up, bandaged him, moved him back to the incubator where he would spend the next several weeks recovering. "Now what?" Sarah asked when it was over. "Now we wait," Dr. Moss said. "Wait for the wound to heal. Wait to see if he can adapt to 3 legs. Wait to find out if he's a fighter or if he gives up." "He's a fighter," Sarah said with certainty she couldn't explain. "He didn't come this far to give up now." Dr. Moss smiled, tired but genuine. "Then I guess you'll need to come back and check on him. Make sure he knows someone's rooting for him." Sarah went back to Fairbanks the next day. Her supervisor at the hospital had been understanding about the emergency absence. Sarah had 200+ hours of unused vacation time accumulated from years of never taking a break, but she had shifts to cover, a life to return to. She drove the 280 miles with her arm in a sling, her entire body aching from the hike and the fall and the emotional exhaustion of the past 48 hours. But she couldn't stop thinking about the cub. She called the center every day for the first week. Dr. Moss or one of the other staff would give her updates, eating on his own now, getting stronger, the surgical site healing well, starting to move around the incubator. In the second week, Sarah drove down on her day off, couldn't help herself. The cub was bigger already, cubs grow fast, and he was standing on 3 legs with an awkward but determined balance. When Sarah approached his enclosure, he came right to the glass, pressed his small face against it, made that same chirping sound she'd heard the day after surgery. The staff said he did that for everyone, but Sarah knew better, or wanted to believe she knew better. "I need to name him," Sarah told Dr. Moss during that visit. "I know he's not mine, I know he belongs to the center now, but I need to call him something other than the cub." Dr. Moss looked at the small bear, then back at Sarah. "What were you thinking?" Sarah had been thinking about it for 2 weeks. "Denali. After the park. Where I found him." Dr. Moss nodded slowly. "Denali. I like it. It fits him." For the next 3 months, Sarah drove to Portage every weekend. 280 miles each way, 5.5 hours of driving, sometimes in weather that made the trip dangerous. She told herself she was checking on her patient, making sure her 9-hour hike hadn't been wasted. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She couldn't stay away. Denali grew. By October he was 60 pounds, his missing paw replaced by a stump that he'd learned to use with remarkable efficiency. He could run, climb, play with the enrichment toys the staff provided. He would never be released, would never live wild, but he could live. That had to be enough. Sarah watched him grow through the observation windows, watched him develop personality and preferences. He liked water, would spend hours in the small pond in his enclosure. He was curious about everything, would investigate every new object with the kind of focused attention that reminded Sarah of a scientist. He was gentle with the staff who cared for him, never aggressive, as if he understood on some level that these humans were different from the ones who had set the trap. In November, as Alaska's early winter settled in with serious intent, Sarah had to make a choice. She'd been offered a promotion at the Fairbanks Hospital, more money, better hours, recognition for her 7 years of excellent work. It would mean more responsibility, less flexibility, fewer chances to make the long drive south. She turned it down. Her supervisor looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Sarah, opportunities like this don't come around often. What's in Portage that's worth giving this up?" Sarah thought about Denali, about the way he would press against the observation glass when she visited, about the sound he made that she'd started to recognize as specifically for her. "A promise," she said. "I made a promise to a patient that I'd see him through his recovery." "Your patient is a bear, Sarah." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "He is." December came. The center threw a small celebration for Denali's estimated first birthday. No one knew his exact birth date, but Dr. Moss figured he'd been born sometime in late January or early February based on his size when Sarah found him. He was 95 pounds now, healthy, thriving. Sarah brought a special enrichment gift, a frozen block of ice with salmon frozen inside. Denali spent 3 hours working to get the fish out, and Sarah spent 3 hours watching him, and neither of them seemed to think there was anything strange about that. "He bonded with you, you know," Dr. Moss said, standing beside Sarah at the observation window. "I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've seen a lot of orphaned animals form attachments to their human caretakers. But this is different." "How?" Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off Denali. "The way he watches for you. Every weekend, like clockwork, he positions himself at this window about an hour before you usually arrive. Waiting." The staff tried mixing up the routine, having different people come at different times. "He still knows. Somehow he knows when it's you." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Is that bad? For him?" "I don't know," Dr. Moss said honestly. "Most of the time, we discourage bonding between captive wild animals and specific humans. It can make them harder to manage, more stressed when that person isn't around. But Denali, he's calmer when you're here. More settled. Like he needs to know you're okay as much as you need to know he is." In January, a year exactly from when Sarah had found him, Denali weighed 140 pounds and had outgrown his enclosure. The center moved him to a larger space, one designed for adult bears, with more room to roam, more complex enrichment, a bigger pond. Sarah helped with the transfer, which was probably against protocol, but Dr. Moss had stopped trying to keep Sarah at a professional distance months ago. Denali explored his new home with enthusiasm, but kept coming back to where Sarah stood at the fence line. Checking, making sure she was still there. "You know he's going to get bigger, right?" Dr. Moss said. "A lot bigger. Full-grown male grizzly can be 600 pounds or more. He's not going to be this cute forever." Sarah laughed. "He could be 1,000 pounds. Wouldn't change anything." "No," Dr. Moss agreed quietly. "I suppose it wouldn't." The months that followed fell into a rhythm. Sarah worked her shifts at the hospital, drove to Portage every weekend without fail. Watched Denali grow from a cub into a juvenile bear, then from a juvenile into a young adult. By his second birthday, he was 280 pounds of muscle and fur, his adult coat coming in thick and dark. The stump where his paw had been was barely noticeable now, just part of who he was, neither disability nor defining characteristic. But something was changing in Denali. Sarah could see it. A restlessness in the way he paced his enclosure, a focus in his eyes when he looked toward the mountains visible in the distance. Dr. Moss saw it too. "He's reaching sexual maturity," she explained during one of Sarah's visits in April of his second year. "That means his instincts are kicking in. Territory, dominance, mating. All the things that wild bears his age would be dealing with. But he's in an enclosure. It's frustrating for him. Can't you make his space bigger?" "We have plans too, but Sarah, there's no space big enough to satisfy a wild animal's need to roam." "That's not criticism, it's just biology. He was born to have hundreds of square miles of territory. We can give him maybe 5 acres at most." Sarah watched Denali through the fence. He was staring at the mountains, completely still, like he was trying to will himself across the distance. "He wants to go home," she said softly. "He can't go home. He has 3 legs." He'd never survive in the wild. I know, but that didn't make it hurt less. In May, Sarah got unexpected news. Her sister in Seattle was sick. Cancer, aggressive, the kind that appears out of nowhere and demands immediate attention. Sarah needed to go, needed to be there, needed to be the person her sister could lean on the way their parents had leaned on each other before they died in a car accident 5 years earlier. She drove to Portage one more time before leaving for Seattle, stood at Denali's fence and tried to explain why she wouldn't be visiting for a while. He watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes, and Sarah could have sworn he understood. Could have sworn he knew this was goodbye, at least for now. "I'll come back," she promised. "I don't know when, but I'll come back. And Dr. Moss will take care of you. You'll be okay." Denali made a sound, low and mournful, that made Sarah's heart break. Then he did something he'd never done before. He turned his back on her and walked to the far corner of his enclosure, lay down with his face toward the wall, and wouldn't look at her again no matter how long she waited. Dr. Moss found her there 2 hours later, still standing at the fence, tears running down her face. "Sarah, you need to go. Your sister needs you." "He thinks I'm abandoning him. He's a bear. He doesn't think." "He does think. You know he does. And he thinks I'm leaving him the way everyone else in his life has left him." Dr. Moss didn't argue, just put an arm around Sarah's shoulders and gently guided her away from the fence. "Come back when you can. They'll still be here. And I'll tell him every day that you're coming back." Sarah left for Seattle not knowing she wouldn't return to Alaska for 3 years. Her sister's cancer was treatable but brutal. Sarah stayed through the surgery, through the chemo, through the recovery that seemed to take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. She got a job at a hospital in Seattle, sublet an apartment, built a temporary life that somehow became permanent. She called the conservation center when she could, got updates on Denali, growing well, healthy, adapted to his enclosure, but the calls became less frequent as her new life swallowed the old one. Sometimes Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night and remember a small cub with a mangled paw, remember the weight of him in her arms during that 9-hour hike, remember the promise she'd made to come back. The guilt felt like drowning. She didn't know that 280 miles north, a young grizzly bear would position himself at his fence line every Saturday morning at the same time Sarah used to arrive and wait. The staff noticed. Dr. Moss noticed. They tried to explain to Denali, as if explanation was possible, that Sarah wasn't coming. But every Saturday he waited. For months. Then years. Some bonds don't care about distance or time. They just are. In year 3 of Sarah's absence, Dr. Moss made a decision that would change everything. Denali was now 5 years old, 480 pounds, in his physical prime. The Conservation Center had been working with Denali National Park on a radical experimental program, releasing captive-raised bears into protected territories with GPS tracking, seeing if they could adapt to semi-wild conditions. "He has 3 legs," Dr. Moss told the park rangers during the evaluation meeting. "But he's smart, he's strong, and he's miserable here. You should see him stare at the mountains. He's dying in this enclosure, just slowly." The rangers were skeptical. 3-legged bears didn't survive in the wild. Except when they did. There were documented cases, rare but real, of disabled bears thriving through adaptation and intelligence. Denali had both. The approval process took months. Evaluations, medical assessments, behavioral studies. Denali passed every test. In August, exactly 5 years after Sarah had found him in that trap, Denali was transported to a release site in Denali National Park, fitted with a GPS tracking collar, and set free. Dr. Moss stood at the release site and watched him disappear into the forest with a speed that surprised everyone. He didn't look back. "Good luck, friend," she whispered. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for." She called Sarah that night. First time they'd spoken in over a year. "I thought you should know. We released Denali today. Into Denali Park, actually. Full circle." Sarah sat down hard on her apartment floor, phone pressed to her ear, unable to speak. "Sarah? You still there? How is he?" "GPS says he's 40 miles from the release site and still moving. He's doing what he was born to do." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the dark and cried. Cried for the cub she'd saved, for the promise she'd broken, for the years she'd let slip away. Cried because Denali was free and she was happy for him and she would probably never see him again, and all of those things were true at the same time. Her sister found her there an hour later, curled on the floor, mascara streaked. "Sarah, what happened?" "They let him go," Sarah managed. "The bear. From Alaska. They let him go." Her sister, who had heard the story many times during chemo sessions when talking about anything else was too hard, sat down beside her. "Isn't that good?" "It's perfect," Sarah said. "It's exactly what he needed. I'm just..." She couldn't finish. "How do you explain that you're grieving a connection to a wild animal you saved once and haven't seen in 3 years? How do you explain that it still feels like the most important thing you've ever done? You saved his life, Sarah. You gave him a chance to be free. That's not nothing." Sarah knew her sister was right, but knowing didn't make the ache any smaller. 2 years passed. Sarah's sister went into remission. Sarah stayed in Seattle, got promoted, started dating a doctor from the hospital who was kind and stable and nothing like her ex-husband. Life was good. Different than she'd imagined, but good. She didn't think about Alaska every day anymore. Sometimes 3 or 4 days would pass without her mind drifting to a small injured cub, to a 9-hour hike that changed everything. The guilt faded. The ache remained, but duller now, manageable. Then her sister announced she was pregnant. Healthy, stable, ready to be a mother. Sarah was going to be an aunt. They celebrated with champagne and tears and plans for the future. "I want to go back," Sarah said suddenly, 3 glasses of champagne in. "To Alaska. Before the baby comes. Just to see it one more time." Her sister smiled. "Then go. I'm not due for 6 months. Go say goodbye to whatever you need to say goodbye to." Sarah took 2 weeks leave from the hospital in July, 7 years after she'd first found Denali. She flew to Fairbanks, rented a car, drove straight to the conservation center in Portage. Dr. Moss was still there, older now, grayer, but with the same calm competence Sarah remembered. They sat in her office and drank bad coffee, and Dr. Moss showed her GPS tracking data from Denali's collar. He established a territory about 40 miles northwest of the release site, right along the Savage River drainage. He's been there for almost 2 years now. Hasn't wandered much, which is unusual. Most bears roam more. Sarah looked at the map, at the little dots showing Denali's movement patterns. Is he healthy? Last visual confirmation was 4 months ago. Park rangers spotted him fishing. 3 legs and all, he was doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. He's figured out how to adapt his fishing technique to compensate. Smart bear. He always was, Sarah said softly. Dr. Moss studied her. You thinking about trying to see him? Would that be crazy? Probably. He's wild now, Sarah. Not the cub you carried out of the backcountry. Even if you found him, he wouldn't remember you. It's been 7 years. Sarah nodded. Knew Dr. Moss was right. But she'd come all this way. I'm going to hike the Savage River Trail anyway. Just to see it. The place where everything started. Dr. Moss didn't try to talk her out of it. Just said, be careful. And Sarah? If you do see him, don't approach. He's wild. That's what we wanted for him. That's what you wanted for him. Sarah promised. She didn't know if she'd keep that promise. The hike into Denali National Park required a permit and a satellite phone and what the rangers called serious bear awareness. Sarah told them she'd been there before, knew the protocols, wasn't afraid. The young ranger issuing her permit looked skeptical but handed over the paperwork anyway. Backcountry's empty this time of year, he said. You'll probably have the whole area to yourself. Just remember, this is Grizzly country. Make noise, keep your food secure, and for God's sake, don't try to approach them for photos. Sarah hiked in on a Wednesday morning, perfect summer weather, clear skies, the kind of day that makes Alaska feel like the most beautiful place on Earth. She made it to mile marker 37, the exact spot where she'd found the trap 7 years ago, by early afternoon. There was nothing there now. No trap, no signs of struggle, just a willow bush and grass and the endless wild. Sarah sat down on a flat rock and let herself remember. The weight of a dying cub. the decision to carry him. The 9 hours that changed both their lives. She sat there for 2 hours, just breathing, just being. Then she set up her tent nearby, not at the exact spot, but close, because she wanted to spend one night here, in this place that meant everything. As the sun started to set, painting the mountains gold and purple, Sarah heard something that made her freeze. Splashing. Coming from the river, maybe 200 yards downstream. Her first thought was, other hikers. Her second thought, as the splashing continued with a rhythm that didn't sound human, wildlife. She should have stayed at her campsite. Should have remembered the ranger's warning, should have remembered Dr. Moss's words about Denali being wild now. Instead, Sarah found herself walking toward the sound, moving quietly through the evening shadows. The river came into view through the trees. And in the shallows, fishing with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, was a massive grizzly bear. Even from 100 yards away, Sarah could see he was huge. Easily 600 pounds, thick summer coat, powerful shoulders. He was focused on the water, on the salmon running, using... Sarah's breath caught. Using 3 legs. His left front leg ended in a stump, and he'd learned to brace himself differently when fishing, to shift his weight in a way that kept him balanced. The technique was awkward but effective. As Sarah watched, he caught a salmon with perfect timing and moved to the shore to eat. It couldn't be. The chances were impossible. Denali's territory was supposed to be 40 miles from here. Dr. Moss had said so. And even if this was him, Sarah was too far away to know for sure. 3-legged bears were rare but not unique. This could be any bear. But Sarah knew. With absolute certainty that defied logic, she knew. Denali, she whispered. Not loud enough for him to hear. Just his name, spoken into the wilderness like a prayer. The bear kept eating. Sarah watched until the light faded, then made her way back to her tent with her heart pounding. He was here. Against all odds, in a park with 6 million acres of wilderness, he was here. At the exact spot where their story had begun. Sarah couldn't sleep. Lay in her tent and listened to the night sounds of Alaska, owls, distant wolves, the river, and tried to understand what the universe was telling her. If it was telling her anything. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe she was seeing meaning where there was only random chance. Around 3 a.m., she heard something outside her tent. Footsteps. Heavy. Moving past her campsite with deliberate steps. Sarah held her breath, didn't move, bear spray in her hand, but knowing it was useless against a bear that size if he decided to investigate. The footsteps paused. Sarah heard breathing, low and slow, just outside the tent wall. Then a sound she hadn't heard in 7 years but recognized instantly, a low rumbling vocalization, not quite a growl, not quite a purr. The sound Denali used to make when he was content, when Sarah would sit by his enclosure and just talk to him. The footsteps moved on. Sarah waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then unzipped her tent with shaking hands and looked outside. In the soft dirt near her tent, illuminated by moonlight, was a single massive paw print. 3 toes. The signature of a 3-legged bear. He had walked past her tent. Had stopped. Had recognized something. Her scent, maybe, or some deeper connection that science couldn't measure. Had acknowledged her presence with that sound she remembered. And had walked on without hurting her, without threatening, just passing through. Sarah put her hand in the paw print. It was twice the size of her palm. This wasn't the small cub she'd carried out of the wilderness. This was a wild grizzly in his prime, 600 pounds of predator. And he had walked past her tent and chosen not to see her as a threat. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat outside her tent and watched the stars and tried to process what had happened. Morning came. Sarah should have packed up, should have hiked out, should have gone back to her normal life in Seattle with this impossible gift of having seen Denali alive and thriving. Instead, she made coffee on her camp stove and decided to stay one more day. One more day in this place where everything had started. She was pouring her second cup when she heard the first roar. The sound came from downstream, aggressive and territorial. Sarah grabbed her binoculars and scanned the riverbank. 2 bears, no, 3. A young male, maybe 400 pounds, squaring off against a slightly smaller bear over fishing territory. The third bear, a female, was moving away from the confrontation, wise enough to avoid the fight. Sarah watched with detached interest. This was nature, this was normal. Bears fought over resources all the time. She should stay clear, stay safe, let them work it out. Then she saw movement from upriver. The fourth bear, massive, moving with purpose toward the fight. Even without binoculars, Sarah recognized that distinctive three-legged gait. Denali. He shouldn't have been getting involved. This wasn't his fight. But he kept coming, his body language aggressive, protective. The two fighting bears saw him approaching and the smaller one immediately backed down, retreating upriver. The young male, though either stupid or too pumped with adrenaline to care, stood his ground. Sarah should have looked away. Should have let nature take its course. Instead, she found herself walking closer to the river, staying in the tree line but moving to where she could see better. The rangers would have called her an idiot. Dr. Moss would have been horrified. But Sarah had to see. Had to know Denali was okay. The fight between Denali and the young male lasted maybe 30 seconds. The young bear was strong, aggressive, but Denali was experienced. He moved with the confidence of a bear who knew his territory, who knew his capabilities, who had learned to compensate for his missing paw with intelligence and strategy. The young male got in one good swipe that caught Denali on the shoulder. Sarah saw blood, felt her heart stop, but Denali's counterattack was devastating. He used his weight, his size, his knowledge of how to fight with 3 legs, and drove the young male back into the river with a roar that shook the trees. The young male fled. Denali stood in the shallows, breathing hard, blood running down his shoulder from the gash. Victorious. Alive. Sarah should have stayed hidden. Should have let him walk away without knowing she'd witnessed his triumph. But she was already moving, already calling his name before her brain could catch up with her heart. Denali! The bear's head swung toward her, ears forward, eyes finding her instantly through the trees. Sarah froze. This was the moment where she would find out if 7 years had erased everything, if Dr. Moss was right and wild bears couldn't remember. Denali stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he took one step toward her. Another. Moving out of the river, water streaming from his fur, blood still running from his shoulder. Moving toward her with his head low, not aggressive but cautious. Testing. Trying to understand what his senses were telling him. Sarah stood perfectly still. Let him approach. Let him make the choice. He got within 30 feet and stopped, and Sarah could see his sides heaving, could see the intelligence in those dark eyes as he tried to reconcile the impossible. A human. In his territory. A human whose scent triggered something in his memory that didn't make sense in this wild context. "It's me," Sarah said softly. "I know you don't understand the words, but it's me. The one who carried you. The one who promised to come back." Denali made a sound. Not aggressive, not warning. The same low rumble he'd made outside her tent. The sound that meant recognition, meant connection, meant something neither of them could fully understand but both of them felt. Then he turned and walked back to the river. Not fleeing. Just returning to what he'd been doing before the fight. Fishing. Being bear. Being wild and free and exactly what he was supposed to be. Sarah watched him for another hour. Watched him fish, watched him eat, watched him exist in his natural habitat with the kind of grace that came from belonging. Then she went back to her tent, packed up her gear, and started the hike out. She had gone maybe 2 miles when she decided to take a shortcut she vaguely remembered from 7 years ago. A narrow trail that would save her an hour if she could find it. The trail was overgrown but passable, winding through dense spruce forest that blocked out most of the sunlight. Sarah was checking her GPS, making sure she was heading the right direction, when she heard the grunt behind her. She turned. 20 feet away, emerging from the undergrowth with his head down and his ears back, was a bear. Not Denali. A younger male, maybe the same one who had fled from Denali's fight. And he was not running now. He was approaching with the deliberate focus of a bear who had decided Sarah was either a threat to be eliminated or an easy meal. Sarah's training kicked in. She made herself bigger, raised her arms, shouted. The bear didn't stop. She pulled her bear spray, got her finger on the trigger. The bear kept coming, 15 feet now, close enough that she could see the foam around his mouth. Rabies, maybe, or just aggressive territorial behavior, and Sarah knew with absolute clarity that she was about to die in the same wilderness where she'd saved a life 7 years ago. She sprayed. The bear roared but didn't stop, just shook his head and kept advancing. Sarah stumbled backward, fell hard over a root, felt her ankle twist with a snap that meant broken bone. Pain shot up her leg so sharp it grayed out her vision for a second. When it cleared, the bear was 10 feet away. Sarah screamed. Not for help. There was no one to hear, but because sometimes when you're about to die, screaming is all you have left. The bear lunged. Sarah threw up her arms instinctively, knowing it was useless, knowing this was the end. She had saved a life, but she couldn't save her own. Then the second bear hit from the side like a freight train. 600 pounds of Grizzly moving at full speed slammed into the attacking bear with enough force to knock him sideways. Sarah watched from the ground, her broken ankle screaming as Denali, because it had to be Denali, couldn't be anyone else, positioned himself between her and the threat with his teeth bared and a roar that made the attacking bear's aggression look like a puppy's tantrum. The young male tried to fight back, tried to get around Denali to reach Sarah. But Denali was relentless, using his size and his fury and that three-legged fighting style he'd perfected to drive the attacker back into the forest until the sounds of their fight faded into the distance. Sarah lay on the ground, unable to move, her left arm bleeding from where she'd fallen on a sharp rock, her right ankle swelling and useless. She fumbled for her satellite phone with shaking hands, managed to pull it from her pack, managed to press the emergency beacon, managed to gasp out her coordinates to the ranger who answered. "Bear attack," she said. "Injured. Can't walk." "Are you safe right now?" the ranger asked urgently. "Is the bear still there?" Sarah looked up at the trees, at the forest where Denali had disappeared. "I don't know," she whispered. Then she heard footsteps, heavy, coming back through the undergrowth. Sarah grabbed a rock. Useless, but her brain was running on pure survival instinct, and tried to drag herself backward with her good leg. Denali emerged from the trees. Alone. Breathing hard, blood on his muzzle, not his own, but moving slowly now. Not aggressively. He walked to where Sarah lay and stopped 5 feet away, just watching her with those dark intelligent eyes that held too much understanding. "You came back," Sarah said, tears running down her face. "You saved me. Just like I saved you." Denali sat down. Right there, 5 feet from an injured human who should have been prey or at least irrelevant. He sat down like a guard dog, like a protector, and he didn't leave. Sarah's phone was still connected to the ranger. "Ma'am? Ma'am, are you still there?" "There's a bear," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off Denali. "He's sitting next to me. He's not attacking. He's just sitting. You need to make noise, try to scare him off." "No," Sarah interrupted. "He protected me. He's not leaving because he's protecting me." The ranger clearly thought she was in shock, possibly delirious. "Help is on the way. Just stay calm. Stay on the line." Sarah stayed on the line, and Denali stayed beside her. For 2 hours while she faded in and out of consciousness from pain and blood loss. For 2 hours while her body went into shock and her vision blurred and she thought maybe she was dying after all, just slower. Every time she came back to awareness, he was there. Still sitting. Still watching. Still choosing to stay with her instead of returning to his wild life. The rescue helicopter found them because of the GPS beacon. Found a woman with a broken ankle and severe lacerations, barely conscious. And found a massive 3-legged grizzly bear sitting guard over her like the world's most dangerous therapy dog. The rangers approached with tranquilizer guns ready, certain they'd need to sedate the bear to reach Sarah. But when they got within 50 yards, Denali stood up, looked at Sarah one more time, and Sarah, even through her shock-addled brain, could have sworn she saw goodbye in that look, and walked away into the forest. Didn't run. Didn't charge. Just walked away with dignity, having done what he came to do. "What the hell was that?" one of the rangers said, watching the bear disappear. "I've never seen anything like that." Sarah had dropped her phone during the attack. The rangers found it and realized it had been recording video the whole time, some automatic safety feature Sarah hadn't known about. 2 hours of footage. 2 hours of a grizzly bear sitting guard over an injured human. The video showed everything. The initial attack, Denali's intervention, the fight, and most importantly, the moment when Denali returned to Sarah and sat down beside her. The rangers replayed it 3 times on the helicopter ride to the hospital, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "Can you zoom in?" one of them asked. "On the bear's ear." They zoomed, and there, barely visible under the thick fur, was the edge of an old GPS tracking tag, the kind the conservation center used. Sarah, drifting in and out of consciousness on pain medication, heard them talking. Heard words like impossible and documented and never seen anything like this. She wanted to tell them it wasn't impossible. Wanted to explain about a small cub with a mangled paw, about a 9-hour hike, about a promise made and broken and somehow impossibly kept. But the words wouldn't come. The medication pulled her under, and she dreamed of amber eyes and a weight in her arms that had changed everything. Sarah woke up in a Fairbanks hospital 3 days later. Her sister was there, having flown up the moment she heard. A doctor explained her injuries: broken ankle, needed surgery. Severe lacerations on her left arm, needed stitches and antibiotics. Mild concussion. She'd live, but recovery would take months. The rangers came to interview her on day 2 of her hospital stay. Brought a tablet with the video footage. Showed her what the whole world was now seeing because someone had leaked it online and it had gone viral. 20 million views. 50 million. Numbers that didn't make sense. People around the world watching a grizzly bear sit guard over an injured woman for 2 hours, watching him drive away an attacker, watching an impossible bond play out in real time. "We checked the GPS tag," the lead ranger told her. "Bear's name is Denali, released from the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center 7 years ago with a tracking collar. The same bear we're assuming that you carried out of the backcountry in 2011? We found the old incident reports." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Ms. Chen, we've reviewed the footage extensively. That bear traveled approximately 40 miles from his established territory. Our GPS data shows he left his area approximately 6 hours after you entered the park. Somehow he knew you were there. Somehow he knew exactly where you were. And when you were attacked, he was close enough to intervene within seconds." "What are you saying?" Sarah asked. The ranger looked uncomfortable. "Honestly, we don't know what we're saying. There's no scientific explanation for how a wild bear could track a specific human across that distance, or why he would. But the footage doesn't lie. He saved your life. Then he sat with you for 2 hours like he was waiting for help to arrive. And he left the moment we got there, like he knew his job was done." Sarah closed her eyes. Felt tears running down her cheeks. "Can I see him again? The bear? Ms. Chen, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, just tell me where he is now. I won't approach him. I won't interfere. I just need to know he's okay." The ranger pulled up GPS data on his tablet. He went back to his territory. Been there for the last 3 days, behaving normally. Fishing, sleeping, being a bear. Whatever happened between you two, I think it's resolved now. I think he did what he needed to do. Dr. Moss came to visit on day 5. Sat beside Sarah's hospital bed and held her hand and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, "I told you he wouldn't remember. I told you he was wild." "You were wrong," Sarah said softly. "I was very wrong," Dr. Moss agreed. "Sarah, I've been studying animal behavior for 25 years. I've seen bonds between humans and animals that seemed impossible. But this is something else. He tracked you across 40 miles of wilderness. He knew you were in danger. He chose to protect you instead of avoiding human contact like every instinct should have told him to do. Then he stayed until he knew you were safe. He paid back a debt," Sarah said. "I saved his life. He saved mine. We're even now." "No," Dr. Moss said firmly. "This wasn't about debt. This was about love. The kind of love that doesn't care about species or logic or what's supposed to be possible. You didn't just save his life 7 years ago. You changed it. You became packed to him in a way that even 7 years of being wild couldn't erase. When you needed him, he came. That's not debt. That's family. Sarah was released from the hospital 3 weeks later with a walking cast and instructions to take it easy for 6 months. Her sister stayed with her in Fairbanks for another 2 weeks, then had to go back to Seattle for prenatal appointments. Sarah's life became physical therapy, follow-up medical appointments, and watching her phone blow up with interview requests from every media outlet in the world. She turned them all down. This story didn't belong to the world. It belonged to her and Denali, and it was finished. Except it wasn't. The Conservation Center called in September. Dr. Moss on the line, excitement in her voice. "Sarah, the park rangers have been monitoring Denali. He's been behaving differently." "What do you mean differently?" "He's moved his territory closer to the Savage River Trail area, where you were camping. He's been there for 2 weeks now. It's like he's waiting for something." Sarah's heart stuttered. "For me? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he just decided to relocate. Bears do that. But Sarah, there's more. He's been gentle. With hikers. There have been 3 separate incidents of hikers encountering him on the trail, and instead of being aggressive or defensive, he just watches them pass. One hiker said he seemed to be looking for someone specific. Kept staring at their face like he was checking if they were the right person." Sarah sat down hard on her couch. "What are you asking me, Dr. Moss?" "I'm asking if you want to go back. One more time. To say goodbye properly. Or hello. Or whatever this is between you two." Sarah thought about her broken ankle still healing, about her job in Seattle, about her sister's baby due in 3 months. Thought about all the logical reasons to say no, to let this story end where it had ended, to stop pushing at the boundaries of what was possible. Then she thought about a small cub with a mangled paw, about a promise made on a mountain trail, about amber eyes that held more understanding than any animal should possess. "When can I go?" she asked. The park rangers were not happy about Sarah returning to the backcountry. Made her sign waivers, made her bring 2 rangers as escorts, made her promise to stay in constant radio contact. Sarah agreed to all of it, even though she knew in her bones that she didn't need protection from Denali. They hiked in on a clear October morning, autumn colors painting the tundra gold and red. Sarah moved slower than she wanted, her ankle still not at full strength, but she moved. The rangers kept trying to make conversation, probably to distract her from nerves, but Sarah barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the landscape ahead, on the feeling growing in her chest that felt like coming home. They made it to mile marker 37 by early afternoon, the exact spot where everything had started. Sarah told the rangers to wait there, that she was going to walk downstream alone. They protested until she showed them the bear spray, the satellite phone, the emergency beacon. Finally, reluctantly, they agreed to give her an hour. Sarah walked along the river, moving quietly, listening to the sounds of water and wind and her own heartbeat. She didn't have to walk far. Maybe 200 yards downstream, she found him. Denali was fishing. Same spot where she'd seen him before, using his 3-legged technique with the efficiency of long practice. He didn't run when she appeared. Didn't even seem surprised. Just looked up, held her gaze for a long moment, then went back to fishing. Sarah sat down on the riverbank, 20 feet away. A respectful distance. A safe distance. And she watched him fish for an hour, watched him live his wild life, watched him be exactly what he was meant to be. As the sun started to dip toward the mountains, Denali caught one more salmon and brought it to shore. He ate half, then did something that made Sarah's breath catch. He picked up the remaining half in his jaws, walked to where Sarah sat, and dropped it on the ground between them. An offering. A gift. The way pack animals share food with family. Sarah looked at the salmon, then up at Denali. He was sitting now, 5 feet away, just watching her with those dark eyes that had seen her at her worst and somehow still chose connection over instinct. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "For everything. For surviving. For being exactly who you are. For remembering me even when you didn't have to." Denali made that sound. The low rumble that meant recognition, meant connection, meant more than words could ever say. They sat together as the light faded, woman and bear, connected by a bond that defied every rule of nature and made perfect sense anyway. When full dark came, Denali stood up, walked over to Sarah, and pressed his massive head against her shoulder. Just once. Just for a moment. Then he walked away into the forest, and Sarah let him go. She hiked out the next morning, went back to Seattle, to her job, to her sister's baby shower. Life continued as it does, and the world slowly forgot about the viral video of a bear who saved a woman's life. But Sarah didn't forget. And every year on the anniversary of the day she'd found him, she took 2 weeks off work and hiked back to mile marker 37. And every year, Denali was there. Sometimes fishing. Sometimes just sitting. Always waiting. They never touched again after that October evening. Never got closer than 20 feet. But they didn't need to. The connection was there, strong as ever, bridging the gap between wild and human, between what should be possible and what simply was. Dr. Moss documented it all. Published papers that tried to explain the unexplainable, that used words like imprinting and bonding and exceptional cognitive recognition. But at the end of all the scientific language, she'd always add one line. Some relationships transcend our understanding. This is one of them. 12 years after Sarah first carried Denali out of the wilderness, she hiked in one more time. She was 44 now, her sister's twins were 10, her ankles still ached in cold weather. Denali was 12, graying around his muzzle, moving a little slower. But when she appeared on the riverbank, he still looked up and made that sound of recognition. Still sat with her as the sun set. Still chose connection over solitude, even after all these years. "I don't know how many more times we'll have this," Sarah said as darkness fell. "You're getting older. So am I. But I want you to know, saving you was the best thing I ever did. Not because of what came after. Just because you deserved to live. You deserved a chance. And you took that chance and turned yourself into something magnificent." Denali stood up, walked over to her, pressed his massive head against her shoulder one more time, harder than before, like he was trying to imprint the feeling of her into his memory. Then he walked away into the forest, and somehow Sarah knew this was the last time. She hiked out the next morning with tears on her face and gratitude in her heart. Got the call from Dr. Moss 3 months later. Denali's GPS tracker had gone stationary. Rangers had found him in his territory, lying peacefully in a sun-dappled clearing, as if he'd simply decided it was time to sleep and never woke up. He was 12 and a half years old. A good long life for a grizzly, especially one who had started it with 3 legs and a death sentence. Sarah flew to Alaska for a small memorial at the conservation center. Just her, Dr. Moss, and a few rangers who had known Denali's story. They didn't bury him, nature would take care of that, but they planted a tree at the center, a spruce sapling that would grow tall and strong, and they told stories about a bear who had defied every odd and lived a life that proved love doesn't care about species or possibility. "He taught me something," Sarah said at the memorial. "He taught me that the things we save often end up saving us right back. That the connections we make matter, even when, especially when, they shouldn't be possible. That love is the most powerful force in nature, more powerful than instinct or logic or what anyone tells us should or shouldn't be real." She still hikes the Savage River Trail every year. Mile marker 37. The place where everything started. And sometimes, in the twilight, she swears she can hear a low rumble from the forest. The sound of recognition. The sound of connection. The sound of a bond that not even death could break. Because some stories don't end. They just transform into something else. Into memory. Into meaning. Into proof that the wildest hearts are sometimes the ones that understand us best. That sometimes, in the harsh mathematics of survival, love is the variable that changes everything. That a 9-hour hike carrying a dying cub can become a lifetime of choosing to show up for each other, across distance and years and every logical reason to walk away. Denali saved Sarah's life. But Sarah had saved him first. And in the saving, they gave each other something more precious than survival. They gave each other purpose. Proof that they mattered. That they were seen. That love, real love, doesn't need words or explanations. It just needs witness. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that the bonds we form with other souls, human or animal, are the things that make us truly alive, then share it. Tell someone who needs to hear that love is possible even in the wildest circumstances. That saving others is how we save ourselves. That the connections we think are impossible might just be the most important ones we'll ever make. And if you believe in these stories, these moments when hearts recognize each other across every barrier nature can create, then subscribe to Feral Soul Stories. Join us in celebrating the untamed bonds that prove we're never truly alone. Because somewhere in the wild places, there are still souls waiting to be saved and hearts ready to save us right back. New stories every week. Real emotions. Untamed hearts. This is the story of Sarah and Denali. A nurse and a bear. A 9-hour hike and a 12-year bond. A promise kept across wilderness and time. This is proof that some relationships are written in something deeper than logic, something stronger than instinct. This is proof that love, wild, impossible, transcendent love, is the force that changes everything. Remember them. Remember that the lives we touch ripple outward in ways we can never fully know. Remember that showing up matters. That choosing compassion over convenience matters. That a single moment of deciding to help can echo across years and miles and turn into something that defies every rule we think governs this world. Sarah Chen carried a dying bear cub out of the Alaskan wilderness and saved his life. 12 years later, that bear traveled 40 miles to save hers. They found each other at mile marker 37, where everything began. And they chose connection over fear, love over logic, impossible over probable. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the wild heart of it all.